Paula, welcome.
Hi, Jill. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine.
Good. Good, good. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
How are you recovering from tax time?
Well, kind of not really. I got an extension and we decided to just kind of wait and deal with that. But one thing I was dealing with now, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on this. I had a personal 401k which
Mhm.
I have to roll over.
Okay.
um, and figure out in 60 days what I should do with it. Um, and I my Gusto says the state of Maryland requires me to set up a 401k. And so I was just trying to figure out if I could set up the business 401k and then roll over my personal into it. Um, or, whether I would still need to find another home for the personal one.
Yeah, if you did a solo 401k, like the one that's associated with Gusto guideline is very easy to set up. And if you do want to contribute to a 401k ongoing, we'll make it super, super easy for you to run it. It also has really low fees.
Okay.
So if you have an old 401k from another provider, right, you can roll it into your 401k if you like those choices. Hey, Judith. Um, if you don't want to put it into the shell of a 401k, you can just roll it over into an IRA. And
Okay.
that would be you direct it. It's a brokerage account, and then you would just, kind of manage it yourself from there. So if you want the ease of kind of targeted funds and other things like kind of come in a 401k, and you think like you're gonna have, I think the decision is like, one, what can you do with the personal 401k, right? You could put it into a solo 401k, or you could put it into an IRA
Oh,
that's in your name. And then the other choice then is, do you intend to contribute going forward, right? Because it doesn't make sense to carry the cost of a 401k if you're not going to contribute.
mm-hmm.
But the 401k also gives you a much higher ceiling of what you could contribute, because if you are going to use a retirement account, a SEP is capped either by what you pay yourself or the profits in the company. And you can
Mm-hmm.
only take a percentage of that, again, depending on how you're organized. But a 401k, statutorily, you are allowed to contribute the max no matter what, as long as you have the money to contribute. So that would let you do the, $72,000. So like if you
Okay.
do want to be able to contribute the most, a 401k can be a better idea if you're thinking you want to contribute like, over what you'd be allowed to do in a SEP.
Okay, yeah. And the thing I guess is state of Maryland requires me to do a 401k.
Ah,
So I think that's the better option for me,
okay.
going forward. I had this great, it was called Digit and then it's now called Opportune, and it just like
Okay.
takes money out of your account,
Okay.
that you won't miss,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
sees, when you have money coming in. And so it was a great way to accumulate some money without doing anything.
Mhm.
But they decided to stop doing that. And so I have to roll it.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So the guideline 401k is really easy to set up. And it's
Okay.
integrated in Gusto. So if you put in Gusto, you want to auto withhold from every, payment that you give yourself, it'll just put it into the guideline 401k completely integrated. If you have any employees that like need like the 3% safe harbor match or anything like that, like it's all set up and completely integrated. And every payroll, it will just pass the payroll register over to guideline. The other thing that's nice about, they don't have a separate TPA, so their fee is just all inclusive of everything that you need to run the 401k, as well as meet the ERISA standard for managing it. So you
Mhm.
don't need a separate company for that. They also will give you the paperwork that you need to get the 3-year tax credit. There's a tax credit right now for small employers if they set up a 401k. So you won't have to pay the fees for your first 3 years. So the first year, if you're rolling over, they make you do the enterprise level, but then you can drop down. But the credit should cover everything. I just went through this for somebody.
Oh, that's great. That's
Yeah. And then
perfect. Like,
I think the last thing about guideline is they use mostly Vanguard funds. So the loads are very low, almost nothing. So, all the money that you're investing in the 401k stays invested. It's not going to pay an advisor or pay, for managed funds. So kind of
right.
all of those things, because you can't set up your own Vanguard 401k anymore. You used
Mhm.
to just be able to set it up with them. Now, if you want a corporate one, you have to go through a provider. So yeah, I marvel at how fast and easy that 401k integration is with Gusto when I have to manage it for other people. Yeah.
That is absolutely great because my clock is ticking on the 60 days.
Yeah.
I'm just like, I need to find something quickly and easily and all that.
Yeah,
So,
it'll take you less than an hour to set it up.
beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
exactly what I needed to hear. So I am so grateful that you've been through this recently and you have Gusto and all that. So beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think at this point I have half a dozen different 401ks that we're managing through different companies and different providers. And every
Yeah.
time I work with Guideline, I'm just sort of like, why are we doing this?
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
so much
Well,
easier.
yeah, I think I will roll another one because I had another one from, 3 jobs ago that was like $1,000 because I only
Yeah.
worked there a year, and so it's like that's in like principal or something. And I'm just like,
Hmm.
I just want to get it all.
Yeah, and you're probably getting eroded their their managed funds there, and you're going to pay a management fee. So even if you're not doing anything, that money is probably getting eroded by fees every year because they're, again, it's a more expensive 401k and there are more
Yeah,
carrying costs. So
yeah.
yeah.
And I think that went in, it had to go into an IRA because you know, I didn't meet their minimum or something. So I'm
Yeah,
just like,
yeah.
but anyway, I will figure that out after I do this.
Great. All
Well,
right.
thank
Well,
you so much, Jill.
you
I have
bet.
to run. I have another call, right now, but I am so appreciative of this.
You bet. Let me know how it goes. If you have any questions,
Okay,
send me an email on the hello.
will
And
do.
yeah. Okay. See you soon. Okay.
Hi.
All right. Hi. Hey,
Hi.
Judith. How's it going?
Good. I really just jumped in because I was curious to know what we could ask you anything about. And I mean, I obviously know more or less what the scope of your work is, but that was a very useful, helpful question and answer to sit in on. And I'm thinking about, this is more for the future, but I'm thinking about setting up an organization that provides, I don't want to call them mental health tools and strategies, but essentially they are.
Okay.
I'm going to find some other phraseology for it, but for teens and
Okay.
children. So I'm just in the early stages of that. It's an extension of the work I've been doing with leaders and with in higher education. I want to shift it down a little bit. So a lot of these issues are going to be on my plate. So uh, just really good to know that this is here as a resource. And then possibly as I'm getting into the weeds on setting up this organization, talking to you about how to actually do that and do it right, do it well, do it right from the beginning so I don't have to dig myself out of unexpected holes,
Yeah, that totally makes sense. That makes
right?
sense. It's
It's
frustrating
like,
for me too when I start to work with someone and I'm like, yeah, our first 2 months are going to be fixing, and then we can do some other stuff, but we got to get this right first. So
yeah,
nobody enjoys that part.
no. Yeah,
Yeah.
getting the right team
Okay.
in place, getting the right people on board. So I'm just figuring that out now. And yeah, to be continued.
Great.
Okay.
Well, as we go, again, I'm gonna kind of jump in. I got a submitted question about contractors in California, and I'm gonna go through some resources, which is probably how you're gonna start with working with parties. So that will be useful. So pop into the chat, anything, or just raise your hand, and we can come back and answer specific questions you have about anything I'm going over with that, or anything else you think of. Just pop into the chat because
Okay, sounds
yeah.
good.
Okay.
I'm gonna go on mute. I'm also
Okay.
actually working on a project and it was like, do I go and do this? Do I work on a project? So I'll be here, but I'm gonna be quiet.
Okay. Great. I'm going to
Happy.
put myself on spotlight too, so that it's
Okay.
okay. Okay. All right. Okay, well, we got off to a fast start. An already immediate question about rolling over a 401k, setting up a personal 401k. So I'm Jill James, for those of you who are just joining now. I just popped some information into the chat about how we run the AMA if this is your first time. You can ask, again, raise your hand at any time or pop it into the chat, or if you don't want it to be in the record of the chat, you can DM it to me and I'll ask it anonymously, just like our other submitted questions that folks had said they didn't want to necessarily say it was them who asked. So anything that you have is fair game. If I don't have an answer or don't have a resource, I can follow up with you, but I will try, as long as I can answer it on the fly. I'll try to get to everything that's in the chat. Okay, so I noted this in the newsletter and kind of over on Instagram, but the first question that came in this month was about working with contractors in California. And I wanted to take this as an opening, since this reader was so kindly gave me 3 weeks to prepare for this answer, to break it out into a few more parts, because I do see a lot of my clients kind of struggling with contractor boundaries because they've come from an employee setting and perhaps have worked in this way with others and it was no big deal. There are some contractor standards in general for the entire United States that changed in March. There was a step back in 2021 where a bunch of things that you had to consider for contractors reduced from 6 down to 3, and the old rules from pre-2021 have been restored. So now there are 6 things just in general you have to think about anywhere in the United States when you work with a contractor. And the biggest things are, is that person allowed to, through their management, have profit or loss? So they can set the rate, and then whether or not they make money from working with you is up to them. It is not a wage. That's a big piece of it. How long the relationship is going to last, that's another big consideration. Typically, if you are, perma contracting or permalancing somebody into like what would be kind of a temporary job, often after 18 months, you're really going to want to reconsider that. That's like kind of the outset of like the longest that you can have a contractor.
And in season one,
hey Judith, I'm getting some background noises. Somebody just check if somebody's not on mute. I think everybody's on mute, but let me just check real quick. Okay. Yep. Okay, we got it. So that's another one, like, how long is this contract going to go? Another big protection for you is they need to have more than one client. So even if they're spending, 51 weeks a year mostly working for you, there should be somebody else on their books that paid them for something in the course of a business year. And then I think the one that's tricky, and this comes up in California as well, is how central you are to the operations of the business. So if it's the core of what you do. So this one's a little less defined in federal, but it's basically like if you have a bunch of people, let's say as an example, who are like, you have an accounting firm and you employ 6 accountants, and suddenly you're adding a contractor who's your 7th accountant. They better do something significantly different than your other 6 accountants, or it could be seen as you're avoiding hiring that person. Or they should be a temporary employee instead of a permanent employee. So I'm going to drop in a resource here just from the Department of Labor. This is the 6 factors. It's written in a way for small businesses, just to help you understand, like, again, anywhere in the United States, this is the basic contractor standard. So California is different in that we have a law from 2019 called AB5 that increases the standard that you have to meet. And the good news is, now that this has kind of worked its way through, most of these contractor standards come up because the person is a sole proprietor and does not have an LLC or an S Corp. So most long-term contractors in California have now either set up an LLC or an S Corp. So you're doing a business-to-business transaction. And that's something to keep in mind of if you are contracting with another business, you can do that all day long. This is the service that they offer. The thing in California that we have to be careful about is when we work with sole proprietors, folks that kind of just hung out their shingle and said, hey, I'm here to consult with you. That gets a little bit trickier because you don't have the protections of saying, I made a contract with a business. You're getting, I made a contract with a person. And in California, there's a higher standard of contracting with individuals where you might be avoiding making them a temporary or seasonal employee or actually a full-time employee. There's a higher bar for that. So the things to look at in California are one, do they have a corporation, right? Or an LLC? Because that's a good first step. That's a good protection. Second, you're going to want a written contract. In fact, in Los Angeles, it's mandatory that you have written contracts now with freelancers and with sole proprietors. So, make sure you have a written contract that spells out your relationship, that they are treated as a contractor and what that means. And I'm going to drop in here a resource. Just going to make a note of it. There is a great kind of startup IP law firm called Cooley. And they offer something called Cooley Go, which are customizable base contracts. And their base contract for the independent contractor agreement is written for California. You may need to make some updates to it, but it will meet all the standards that you're looking for working with California contractors. It probably has some extra terms you don't need because it's written, assuming you have technology and software that you're developing. So if you are at that level, it's great. Otherwise, you can sort of reduce the language to what you need for your business. But Cooley Go is a great place to start for a conforming California independent contractor agreement, or you can use it in other places too, because you've met the highest standard. You can always reduce it, or know that you've gone above and beyond in your agreement to what's required for wherever you're contracting with this person. Okay, so other things about AB5, right? So we've talked about, again, easier if they are a business, and also make sure you have a written contract. So the standard used for AB5 is called the ABC test. And basically we have to make sure the worker is free from control and direction of the hiring entity in the performance of the work under contract and in the way it's executed. So you are saying, like, this is the work I'd like you to do, but the individual can say, these are the hours I'm available, this is when I'm not available, this is how I'm going to do the work, right? They have to have some say in that. And there's a little bit higher standard in that. Let's see. So they're performing some kind of work that is not in the flow of your regular business. So this is, again, where if you had that accounting example that you had 6 accountants and you were hiring a 7th one as a contract, you would absolutely want to make sure that they were an LLC or an S Corp, because that's in your core business and it would violate that person is supposed to be an employee. So again, most California individuals have taken care of this by becoming businesses. But if it is the core of what you do in your business, right, then it's hard to justify why that person is not an employee in California. And I think that's the biggest thing that's tricky for people, is that core business piece, because we often want to hire people who just kind of help out for a few hours in what we do. So remembering there are other employment categories besides full-time exempt, right? We have part-time, we have seasonal, we have temporary, we have interns. So, considering there are all those categories, you are probably hiring a part-time employee or a temporary full-time employee in your core business, and just, again, something to keep in mind. And then the other is extremely important that a California contractor have other clients, that they are independent, like they have their own flow of business and are not only working for you. And again, generally, if both of you agree, I mean, for 12 to 18 months, this is going to be okay. I would just really make sure they have some other business in place. Just check in with them that you are not the only client that they have. And we've even had, folks kind of set up a separate agreement, like, hey, I could subcontract this to you through a different business, or you could subcontract it to me. So, you do want to make sure that in the course of a 12-month year, you are not the only revenue source for a California contractor, because that will get sticky. California is also a place where if you violate this, California will come after you. A lot of other states, this is relatively low risk. California does a lot more monitoring. You have to anywhere you hire a new contractor, you have to register, but California has a 14-day, must register your new contractors. If you're setting up contractors through a payroll system, most will offer to do this automatically for you, again, in any state. But in California, they're going to keep an eye on, when you set up this contractor, is it really a contractor relationship? And I think, again, the place that this goes wrong is contractors sometimes don't understand the benefits that they are eligible for. Where I've seen this go wrong is if a contractor then says, oh, I don't work for you anymore, I get unemployment. Well, if they do that, then that triggers to the state of California or any other state, hey, I think I'm an employee. So in other states, you just fill out the paperwork and are like, no, these were our terms, again, part of having a written contract. And most of the time, it's just going to be like, yeah, this person made a mistake. They don't understand how the system works. In California, they might actually do an investigation on your business. So again, that's, you really want to be clear, like, hey, when this ends, you are not eligible for unemployment. You are not eligible for any benefits. We don't give you any time off, right? You have to tell us. So you just want to be super, super clear with your California contractors. But again, in general, I think there's some avoidance of working with people in California. I hear people from like really low labor rights states that like their accountant or their lawyers like just don't work with people from California. And it's extremely low risk if they are incorporated, right? If they are a business, again, you're protected, you're a business, they're a business, businesses can work with each other. Be really careful if they require a 1099, if they do not have a business shell set up, that is a place where, again, you are more, it's more risky in California to work with individuals who do not have LLCs or S Corps. So that to me is the biggest thing to look at. So if you are considering working with independent contractors in California, I'm going to drop a resource into the chat. It just goes over, again, from the California Department of Revenue and Department of Labor. These are the independent contractor standards. So yeah, I would say, I just want to make sure I've answered the core of this question, right? So it's asking about the California Statement of Work and Contract. So this is another part in general, right? You want to have a statement in your contract that just says, these are the terms of our agreement, right? This is, the length, this is how much we're going to pay you, you're treated as a contractor. You want NDA language in there of like, our IP is our IP, you cannot bring stuff in, you cannot take stuff out. You're going to follow privacy policies. In California, we have a higher standard for privacy. So, letting them know like, hey, if you're using our systems, if you're working with our people, these are the policies you need to follow. You're subject to our policies. And then separately, the statement of work just outlines, again, what work they're going to be doing. So make sure it has, some kind of clear deliverable or self-directed isn't just, hey, you're going to work 25 hours a week for me doing whatever, right? You want to make sure there are really clear things that they are assigned to do or deliverables or things they have to show up for. I would look at it as like, we expect you to attend these meetings, right? If there are time restrictions that you need to put in there, like you need to be available at these times for these meetings, right? At a reasonable level. We expect you to produce these kinds of documents or deliverables by these dates. You will be working on this project and it has this term. So be clear of like, you are not just hiring them on an open-ended whatever. And this is, again, for any contractor, this is a good idea, but particularly in the state of California, you want to make sure there's a statement of work that says, here is what you are doing for me, and here's how we're going to handle the work. Like, I'm letting you choose the when and how of this within these time constraints, or we've agreed you will show up for these things, but the rest of the time, when and how you do it is up to you. So yeah, that the specificity in your statement of work is important in California. again, I wouldn't want to see anyone write an independent contractor agreement that just says work for 25 hours a week at this rate, right? That's pretty, pretty soft. And if ever there was a dispute, that would probably get you in trouble, force you to become an employer, pay back taxes, pay into unemployment. But if you have a clear contract, that's going to protect you of like, we agreed to this. And if the other person overstepped, that's their problem because that's not your responsibility. That's them not running their business well. Okay. So hopefully that helps in terms of working with contractors in California, how to structure your contract, how to write an SOW so that you're not getting yourself in trouble. Yeah, have them have another client. Just so the last thing I will say on that is if you have an individual and you really want to work with them and they do not want to become an LLC or an S Corp, and they would fall in the core of your business or create a problem, you can go through a staffing agency. And this can, be, again, someone who's in a non-managerial role, like an assistant. That's really hard to hire as a contractor unless they're set up as a business. Or if they're operating in your core business, you can work with a staffing agency and have the staffing agency hire that individual, and then you pay the staffing agency. So that is a workaround. If you really want to work with someone and you just don't feel comfortable hiring them directly because of the way they're incorporated. You are welcome. Okay. If you have any other follow-ups on contractors, please pop them in the chat. If you're watching this on the replay, you can email me at hello@thejilljames.com, and I'm happy, to answer more specific questions that you have after the fact. Okay. I'm going to move on to the next one. This came up from yesterday's email. There is a new EEOC harassment standard guideline around gender identity. And the question is, I have only 2 employees. Does this apply to me? Also, how does it apply to my contractors? So if we take a step back, the new rules that came out April 30th are kind of like things that were in effect over several years, but kind of were a hodgepodge. And there were a lot of EEOC actions about discrimination around how people express their gender identity at work and felt they weren't being treated fairly. So gender identity means how you identify to other people, how you would like to be recognized, what pronouns you'd like to use, the name that you would like to use, the spaces that you like to occupy. All of that has to be respected at work. If you have state or local laws that are less specific than this, you should seriously consider stepping up to the federal standard because that, again, is a protection for you. But this officially has been recognized as harassment, and there isn't a religious protection anymore. You can't say, hey, I don't recognize that a person could be non-binary or transgender, and I would have to use a different name or, a different pronoun. And my religion says that isn't real. That is no longer a protected standard. So you have to educate your workforce, even if you just have 1 employee, because everyone is now subject to this harassment standard. So even if it's you and your employee, and that employee, potentially is working with customers or individuals or contractors who might identify on different spectrum of gender identity, you are liable for helping them understand, like, this is how we treat people. So another thing is, like, if you bring contractors into your business and you expect them to have difficulty with this, you also need to train them, right? Because they have to meet the harassment standard. If your contractor harasses someone in your business, again, you are liable, especially if it's your employee, you're subject to an EEOC action and a general discrimination lawsuit. So in general, no matter the size, there are a lot of employment laws that say under 5 or under 10, you don't have to do this. On this one, in general, the best thing to do is just train everyone. There are, several systems of harassment training standards online. They have to be interactive. They have to ask questions. They have to, cover a certain number of issues. But they can be, passive, interactive, and meet state and federal standards. So for individuals, it's 1 hour of training. For managers, it's 2 hours of training. Should be done within 6 months of hiring. But again, you can ask your team to be trained at any time. You can repeat the training. If you think it didn't stick for someone, you can ask them to do it again, but just sort of minimum standards around harassment training of how much and how frequently people need to undertake them. On my resources page, we work with a company called EasyLlama, which has not just compliant harassment training, but across the board, many other kinds of training. It's very cost effective, and you can enter your employee census. It will set everybody up based on where they're located, whether they are a manager or not, and how frequently they need to be trained. And it will track that they have completed on time, that they are compliant. It will send you the certificates of compliance that you need. And there are, again, other systems. We've just found this one to be really easy, and people seem to stick with the way that the training is done seems to stick. So I think this sort of was a relatively quiet change in the last 10, 15 days. But again, given the political climate around gender identity in a lot of states, you as the employer have to be proactive in taking responsibility to make sure everyone understands this is now the standard of how we work. So I would encourage you to invest in the training that you need, and also look at if you need to have a written harassment policy that spells out what is and isn't acceptable in your workplace. Okay. The next question. Okay, this one's more fun. I got a tax refund. Does that go back into my business, or is that personal? Very good question. So if you are an LLC, S Corp, sole proprietor, if you're any kind of pass-through entity, you are ultimately the person responsible for the taxes. So if you get a tax refund, that is refunded to you, the person, on your overall tax liability. Only if you very specifically have an S Corp return and it was taxes paid by the business, potentially you would put it back in the business. But generally, if you're going to get a refund, it's to you, the person, for your total household tax liability, and it comes back. So you can decide what to do with that money, right? You can keep it, spend it as personal funds. You can loan it back into the business. You can make it as a capital investment. But it isn't, if you do decide to put it back into the business, it's not just a deposit. You want to record it as either a loan to the company, so you can take it back in the future, or a capital contribution, which again goes on your balance sheet. We want to note that that money went in when you didn't have to put it into the business. It's not, and you also want to make sure it's not recorded as income. So be super, super clear. If you get a tax return and decide to reinvest it in your business, make sure you qualify it correctly, because that is money that is yours that you are reinvesting in the business, not that the business generated and you owe back to it. And if you're confused, ask your tax preparer, just say, I got this refund. Where do I put it? So 95% of you, it will be into your personal bank account, and do what you want with it. Okay. Next question. I took an EIDL loan and I'm considering closing my business. Do I have to pay it back? This is a very good question. Lots of people took the economic support, the disaster relief funds during the pandemic or during a state disaster. And so on the EIDL terms, if you borrowed less than $200,000, there's no personal guarantee. So check again the terms of your loan agreement, but most of the time, if it's under $200,000, you do not have to pay it back. If you took a loan of over $200,000, you signed on for personal liability for that loan, and it has to be paid back before you can close the business. So just a consideration there. Think about, again, working with your accountant, looking through your agreement. You can contact the SBA for relief if you're having difficulty making your loan payments. But you will, again, don't just shut down the business and assume that that goes away. Figure out what your liability is, and if you have to pay it back, it may force you, even if you're minimizing the activities of the business, you'll have to keep it open until the loan is repaid, because the entity does own the business or owe the money, or you operating as that entity. So make sure, again, you understand the terms of your EIDL before you close your business, and then, end up violating the terms and would hit your credit report and potentially impact your ability to borrow as you, the human, in other settings. Okay. Next question. I'd like to sell my company in 2 to 3 years. What are some things I should consider now? Good question. 2 or 3 years is the right horizon to think about when you're starting to prepare for an exit. Because, again, in valuing a business, whoever is buying it is probably going to ask to see your books from the previous 2 or 3 years and look at your performance as part of how they choose the value of the business. So you want to make sure you have your really good books and records. If you're trying to look for things that create value in your business during that time, one is recurring revenue. So people who pay you over and over on a subscription or on a recurring contract. Another is written contracts. So having income that has terms and someone has to pay you based on a contractual relationship. Another is intellectual property. So if the business owns, again, the name, trademark, patents, anything like that, that can be transferred to somebody else. Those create value in your business. Sales of physical products, that makes a difference, streams that way. And also your profitability. So there is that look back for valuation. So it's not just on your revenue, looking at how profitable you have been over the period before you sell the business. Will show, again, people may be looking for, can I make it more profitable? Can I sustain this profitability? But often people will want to see that you've operated the business profitably, and you will be able to justify a higher valuation if cash is being kicked off by those businesses. Another thing to think about is how much debt you're carrying. So that will impact the overall valuation. So, if you are thinking about potentially moving into an exit, there are a class of advisors called exit counselors or exit specialists. And they can kind of walk you through, the more time that you have, the better. It's really hard to do this in the moment. Somebody says, hey, I want to buy your company, or hey, I'd like to take this out to market and sell within 6 to 12 months. You don't have any space to go back and say, hey, I wish this looked better, or hey, I wish we had done these things. So, there is space when you're 2 to 3 years out to say, here, what are the things that we can do? How would I like this business to look when someone looks back on how I operated it in the last 1, 2, 3 years? How will this impact valuation? So consider that, and consider engaging someone who can help you with what's going to make a difference, and what's going to tell the story you want to tell when you sell the business. Okay. Oh, similar question. How can I make my services company more valuable? Okay, this is a good question because, again, services, if we have recurring revenue, that helps. But services businesses, tend not to make things or have, much beyond IP and branding. So sometimes services businesses, it's hard to get a higher valuation unless you're just really, really profitable or have a great client list. But things that you can do to make your services company more valuable. One is branding. So a brand name and all of the things that go with branding, trademarking, copyrights, visibility, being known for a brand name, that can add value into services company. Another, a dedicated email list or a dedicated contact list. That is something that can be transferred to a new company so that they can communicate, again, to a dedicated audience who've said they're interested. An email list is actually quite valuable in a services company. Recurring revenue products. So again, things that people pay you for on a repeated basis, not just I did this one service this one time for this one company, but things that they engage you for ongoing and perhaps are not needing to be resold on a regular basis. Intellectual property, of course, for every business raises value. And in a services business, your team, the team that you build, and lessening the dependence on you as the day-to-day person doing the work in the business will raise the value of the services business. If you are thinking about going this direction, last week's newsletter where I looked at, I know for a lot of folks, it's sort of like, when we're talking about contractors and employees, this can be sort of a challenging thing to consider. Some people just don't want to have employees. In last week's newsletter, I provided a survey and a study from Gallup that shows the difference between owners in businesses with employees and businesses without employees, and the difference in valuation and in financial wealth generation. So if you are interested in that, that is in, we now have a newsletter archive. Just go to thejilljames.com. And you can click through to that, or on any newsletter, if you say read on the web, that'll take you to the archive as well. So if you are interested in, again, how do you build a team to add value to your services business, there are a lot of good tips in that survey that's linked. Okay. Okay, this is the last submitted question that I have. If there's anything else from the folks who are here live, pop it into the chat. I'll come back and check after this one. Otherwise, we'll wrap up. Okay, is there any way to get access to pregnancy leave while I'm self-employed? Okay. So two directions on this one. The first is there are states, about 18 states, that have paid leave for pregnant people. So if you are in a state that offers a state level of paid leave for pregnancy and pregnancy-related disability, then that's step one. You have to be in one of those states in order to access it. So a bunch of you are now out of, if you're not in a state that has a paid leave program related to pregnancy, there's no way to get paid leave as a self-employed person. The second piece is if you are in one of those states, very often you have to be paying into the disability system. So often, if you are an S Corp and you made yourself an employee, it's easier to access that because you will have been paying into the disability system and the employment system and the unemployment system. All of those things as a W-2 employee of your own business help you be eligible for that. It makes it pretty straightforward to make the claim of, I know I should be able to access these worker programs. If you are an LLC and you've been paying in, you can make that claim. It's a little more difficult if you're not a W-2 employee. So if you are pregnant and you are an employee of your own S Corp, it's probably relatively straightforward. If you are an LLC owner or a sole proprietor, probably more challenging. Yeah, so the other thing you can do is contact your state representatives and your federal representatives. There are bills currently being debated about national pregnancy leave rights, pregnancy leave support. And so, this is a good time to speak to your congressional representatives about what this would mean to you, and how valuable it is to you. I don't know that we can promise that it'll happen, in the whatever period you have left before you have a baby, but there is a general movement in Congress to establish a paid leave standard for pregnant people. So, again, something that you can voice your opinion on. If you are not in one of those states, that has paid leave, a federal standard would create that for you. It doesn't have to be created in your state. So again, something that you can voice your opinion on as a business owner, as an individual, about whether or not we should have that for everyone. Okay, that is all the questions that I have for this week's AMA. So we are, our regularly scheduled AMAs are on the second Thursday of the month at 10 o'clock Pacific time. You can add all of them to your calendar using the link that I've been putting in the email. Let me see if I have it handy here. Yeah, I do. Okay, I'll pop that into the chat. This will add all the events for the rest of the year on that add event link. If you want to be reminded, you can bring your questions live. You're welcome to listen in. If you're watching this on replay and you have questions, drop me a note at hello@thejilljames.com, and I'm happy to follow up with any more specific questions that you have. You can also submit questions at any time during the month as they come up, and I'll add them into the list, especially if it's something that, maybe like the California contractor question that needs some resources or a little bit more answer. It's nice to get those a few days in advance so that I have a little time to prep an answer for you and potentially put some links in there. But if it's on the fly, we'll do our best. And if I need to follow up by sending you follow-up links or follow-up resources, we can do that as well. So thank you for subscribing to the newsletter. Thank you to those of you who signed up through the AMA through social channels. Our newsletter comes out on Wednesdays. There is an archive now where you can look at the previous editions for 2024. So if you're new to the newsletter, you can kind of catch up. There's not, we're only in the beginning of the second quarter, so there's not so much to catch up on from this year, but take a look at that. And we'll continue to provide the AMA and answer any questions that you have as they come in through the newsletter in this forum. So thank you for making the time to join us. Thanks to those of you who are watching this later. I hope you found it helpful, and I'll look forward to seeing you in June.